Due Process, winner of 22 Regional Emmy Awards, including the 2012 and 2013 Mid-Atlantic Emmys for Outstanding Discussion Series. Due Process is a presentation of Rutgers School of Law, Newark, and the Edward J. Blaustein School of Planning and Public Policy. Studio facilities provided by the Rutgers ITV Studio, Division of Continuing Studies.
Okay, Weehawken is a drug charge. I'm recalling all the warrants.
Warrants for just unpaid tickets. But any warrant can be a trigger for arrest, a barrier to a license or a job. So when this event comes to town, thousands show up for a rare chance at a fresh start. It's called Fugitive Safe Surrender, and it's next on Due Process.
Major funding for Due Process provided by the Fund for New Jersey, supporting informed citizens for an effective democracy. Additional funding from Genova Burns and the New Jersey State Bar Foundation.
You may not commit a major crime, maybe not a crime at all. It could be a ticket you didn't pay, a child support payment you didn't make, just enough to trigger a warrant for arrest, and that puts you on the wrong side of the law. I'm Raymond Brown.
And I'm Sandra King. So what do you do if you're one of the many with outstanding warrants that could get you locked up? You could spend every day looking over your shoulder, you could walk into a precinct and take your chances, or you could hope for a state-sponsored way to get your life back on track.
No contrabands, no lighters, no nail clippers.
When had a once grand Greek Orthodox church in the heart of Jersey City last seen so many at its doors?
And you're going to go across the street to the armory.
They came seeking a rare chance at salvation.
Get on it.
But not the kind a church usually provides.
We've done interviews of people, and 80% said they would only surrender at a church.
What these men and women came looking for was legal absolution.
Anything else? Any weapons and drugs on you?
Or at least leniency.
The money stool will be vacated and the T-pay will be dismissed.
And most of them found it.
We resolved all the issues in court that you had to resolve today.
Officials emphasize this is not an offer of amnesty, but for many, it came close.
How much you owe in child support?
$25,000.
What do you want to do with this? You going to pay it?
No, I don't have the money.
All right, I'm going to vacate the bench warrant on this docket, and I'll set a payment schedule of $25 a month.
Each of the hopefuls who came to the church and the armory just across the street had a story to tell.
I'm at the time of my life where I'm getting a little older, and I can't keep doing this.
Please raise your right hand.
A burden to set down.
I would have got locked up eventually.
And a chance to get back on the good side of the law.
And under my authority, I can waive that T-pay. So you're done with Weehawken. So good luck to you, sir.
All of them were fugitives, not the major crimes kind. No stories here of murders or rapes, armed robbery, or atrocious assault.
Tickets and a CDS charge and something else. I forgot. I think a theft charge or something like that.
These were tales of tickets not paid, court dates somehow missed, child support payments unmade.
So you owe payments in 2 courts?
Yes, sir.
The relatively minor infractions that don't trigger a manhunt or even an investigation.
Slowly walk towards me.
But they do trigger warrants.
The single greatest barrier to employment is an outstanding warrant.
And that can change everything.
What we do here today with the entire law enforcement community is we clean up the past records of people's lives to enable them to move forward, to be productive, and to get a job.
Outstanding warrants mean you can't get a license, can't pass a background check, rent an apartment, get a job. And every passing patrol car, every cop on the beat Even the most minor encounter with police can mean you're about to be locked up.
We just here to encourage them just to stay here and get all of that taken care of and walk out as a free person.
Douglas was one of dozens of volunteers processing thousands of fugitives along with scores of workers, prosecutors, public defenders, and judges from 3 counties.
This is State versus John Hughes. May I have appearances, please? There's a whole risk that's associated with outstanding warrants, so the fact that they're able to, in an orderly way, resolve the warrants certainly helps eliminate that problem.
They're nonviolent offenders, but at the end of the day, they are fugitives. And so they go in front of a court system here, and it changes the direction of their life, hopefully.
In the end, a record 4,500 fugitives showed up, and only 2 failed to go home with new court dates, reduced fines, and no need to fear the next patrol car coming.
You have no warrants out of Weehawken.
What about Union Township?
I'm looking for Union Township.
This is set up to help you and not just lock you up. If I walk in the precinct and I got warrants, they're going to lock me up.
Like many of those who turned out in Jersey City, Stanley Barkley has served time in prison.
But if I come here to take a chance, it's self-surrender, so they're not going to lock me up.
I have a lot of priors, but I've trained my life around. I've been doing pretty good the past 6 months, so I just want to take care of this last one I have.
It enables them sort of to clean up that past wreckage of their lives so they can once again be legal, law-abiding citizens.
257. There. Who's 257? Right here.
And they can do it all in a controlled environment at a fraction of the cost and a fraction of the penalties. What the state calls
Getting favorable consideration.
Okay, give me a hug. I want to walk you to motor vehicle commission. Come on.
Do you have any questions?
no. Thank you. The Jersey City Safe Surrender was just the state's 5th and its most successful. Still, there's no word when or if there'll be another. It is an expensive, complex effort with lots of moving parts, months of planning, and hundreds needed to make it work.
For the how and why of Fugitive Safe Surrender and whether it's worth continuing, we turn to 3 of those who've played a part. From law enforcement, Assistant Attorney General Wanda Moore, Community Justice Director for the AG's office. From the academic side, Lori Scott-Pickens, who heads community outreach at the Rutgers School of Criminal Justice. And from the faith-based community, Reverend Bill Howard, whose Bethany Baptist Church hosted the 2nd Fugitive Safe Surrender 5 years ago in Newark. Welcome to all of you.
Thank you.
Wanda Moore, since, as we say, there are so many moving parts and there are the feel of a coalition about this and many different segments of society interested, how did this idea start? What are its origins?
Well, the program started after an officer was shot and killed in Cleveland, Ohio. The United States Marshal Service decided...
Was he serving a warrant?
Yes, he was actually following a fugitive. And so in pursuit of that fugitive, he was shot and killed. So the United States Marshal Service decided there must be a better way. And that's when they began a discussion with the faith community. So they came to the faith community and said, if we work together and we brought people in who would be willing to come to your church and surrender, could we work with them and resolve some of those warrants? And that's where Fugitive Safe Surrender began.
So, Lori, it actually doesn't start with how do we help these people repair their lives, but it starts with how do we keep police safe.
Absolutely. The warrant that the police officer Wanda mentioned was serving it for a nonviolent offense. And there was no reason for the fugitive to fear. So with flight or fight, the fight occurred and the officer lost his life, unfortunately.
Now, we're not surprised that Bethany would be involved with this, but does the overture suggest that there's a broad consensus in support in the faith-based community, which I know is a terrible generalization, for this kind of effort?
I think there are quite a few faith communities that affirm this. We had volunteers at Bethany from quite a few different churches, I think, and maybe mosques. But whether churches as corporate entities would necessarily embrace it, I'm not sure. I think there are those that will. But clearly from the response we got from participants and volunteers, there's a wide embrace.
Bill, you and Bethany have been working on justice strategies, community justice strategies for a long time. This is just one piece of it. How much difference do you think something like this makes when we're up against a system that we know makes reentry so difficult, when we're up against mass incarceration, when we're up against kids who find themselves in the system at 13 years old? How does this fit into all of that?
Well, every little bit helps. And when you see the faces of people who receive this relief on the spot, you know the value immediately. Now, some of these people probably wind up with other warrants. I don't know that for sure, but I can imagine. But I also believe there are people who really use this as an opportunity to try to turn a corner. Most of these people are victims of poverty. I mean, when you look at the nonviolent offenses, they're often offenses related to their not having sufficient resources to settle their business. So it is a part of a really important network of problems that people have in the community, and this is no permanent solution. But the relief that people experience, the joy, the impact it has on families is without a doubt very impactful.
Wanda, it's logical to look at the Marshal Service, especially as the originating entity, and say they made a pretty logical decision that the value of bringing nonviolent offenders in and eliminating risk to law enforcement is such an obvious one that we don't have to debate it. But has the concept been refined enough to say, well, maybe people who've been involved with minor assaults, maybe where the assault and resulted in warrants to both? That is, has there been an attempt to look at calibrating some of the lesser kinds of violent offenses as opposed to just keeping this idea? Because it would seem to me that if you look at the danger to police officers serving warrants, that probably is elevated with the seriousness of the crime.
Right. One of the things that we've been able to do is to bring in most of the misdemeanors and your low-level offenses. So we are able to take indictable cases. We bring them in, as well as child support. And of course, the majority are traffic tickets. But the percentage of misdemeanor cases is about 33%. But we also have some indictable cases that we bring in as well. And they range. And quite frankly, there have been people who have turned themselves in more serious matters. Of course, many of them found themselves staying with us until we could resolve their bail status.
When you say staying with us, you mean they went home for dinner, or you said?
I mean, they actually didn't get a chance to go home for dinner.
No, I've known you for a long time, and you talk so gently. But.
Yes, and so we've been able to actually work with them as well, because you're right. People who are wanted on serious offenses who want to use this as an opportunity to bring themselves in safely, it is an opportunity for them to do that, and we have had people do that.
But isn't it a public relations problem? You get huge amount of support for this program, in part because you're able to keep reassuring these are nonviolent offenders, these are people who are no threat to society, they haven't done anything so terrible. What's the chance that Raymond's very reasonable argument that you use this not for people who are wanted for murder or for rape, but for people who've who are in there with some fairly serious warrants, let them go this way too? What do you think, Lori?
Well, let me just say, as a person who doesn't have to raise the money, I think even at the current level, this is a valuable program. And I'm always worrying about whether we will have the resources, whether Wanda and Lori and their team will have the resources even to do this. And I do think...
But would it be more effective if, in fact, you expanded it?
Oh, sure. No doubt. And perhaps more controversial.
But easier for you to say than for
perhaps
Lori
more controversial, but I think doable. But the point is that, I don't know what they have to do, but I know that every time we complete one, there's no more money.
Lori, you nodded your head when Bill said there's a fiscal issue here. Tell us what that is.
Well, the putting together Fugitive Safe Surrender is very comprehensive. As you mentioned in the beginning, that it could take up to 9 months for groups of individuals from the court, law enforcement, the community, and the faith-based community to come together to put this, to make it operational. That has a cost factor.
And the money comes from forfeitures?
No, not necessarily. Where's the money come
The
from?
initial funding was actually a federal grant. We went ahead and applied for a federal grant to do 3. And after the successful 3 that we did after Camden, we decided to do this last program. So we were able to use state dollars to do the last program.
So why is there any consideration of not doing this again, like often, like why not twice a year? I mean, I understand it's a big job, but if it works this well, isn't, it kept being described to me as a win-win. If it's such a win-win, why is this not being built into the institution?
Well, I'm going to take a liberty here and voice my opinion and say that it will probably be more cost-effective to find a way to purge cases in New Jersey rather than to keep them on the books. As we know, there's only 3 ways right now to rid yourself of a warrant. You either pass on, you turn yourself in, or you're going to get arrested if you get caught. People are hiding in plain sight. And rather than have that happen, we should follow the model of other states that after a certain amount of time, your cases or your offenses are purged. And I think you have to
It disappears or you have to apply for that?
I'm not sure, but purging means that after a while it's off the books. You're no longer running for a traffic ticket that's 5 or 10 years old. I've seen people surrender at Fugitive Safe Surrender that have issues that stem back 20 years, 30 years. We've seen people as young as 18 and as old as 80 turn themselves in on outstanding warrants. So if New Jersey could move to a process of purging and forgiving some of these nonviolent offenses over time, I think that would be far more cost effective and easier. And there is precedent for it in other states.
Is that under consideration now at any high levels of government, the EG's office, or?
I'm turning to Wanda.
Your friend has put you on the line.
One of the things that we've been able to do is we take in a lot of information that we learn from Fugitive Safe Surrender, why people find themselves in that situation, how many times they've been in that situation. And one of the things that we've been looking at is how do you institutionalize this process? How could we create a process in which people could surrender and resolve their matters and have the opportunity to do that? So there have been discussions and
without
meetings
having
and
this
groups.
mass event?
Without having the mass events, how can we actually do this as a part of the structure? So we have had ongoing dialogue now with our various state partners as what would that take? For example, motor vehicles was a major partner in our last event, and they always have been. But one of the things that they were able to do is to actually set up a full service operation so that people, when they were finished with Fugitive Safe Surrender, could actually go over to motor vehicles and find out what exactly they need to do to have their license reinstated. What do you need to do to get it restored? And so we've been working and looking at ways to work together to figure out how to do this.
But it seems to me that if there's a subtle comparison here with reentry programs. And what we know from reentry is if people aren't given a broad range of support, their chances of failure and reoffending are high. So the very example you gave, or one that frequently comes up with clients is, I want to turn myself in, but I'm wanted in 2 different jurisdictions on minor offenses. If I go to jurisdiction number 1, even if I satisfy it, I'm going to get arrested and be in jail for 4 days. I mean, there are all kinds of systems like that that create all kinds of costs.
And I think we must have law enforcement involved in all of this. But the
courts.
But you have me here. I'm a clergyman, so I have to say, this is this complicated thing as you described it. I met a man at Bethany when he came, Fugitive Safe Surrender. He had traffic tickets in all 21 counties. And he was like in his 20s. This is a guy in the prime of his work life. He had children. So we have to look at this as a rip in the fabric of our society. And I think that what I learned in Fugitive Safe Surrender is when it brings all of these interesting elements of the community together. It was quite interesting when we started. There was a certain kind of balkanization of tasks. By the last day, it was almost like a community. And there's so many elements.
I want to contest Lori's idea, which is let's make this institutional. But it's also true that it's not so, for example, the courts have a role, and the municipal courts are different from superior courts and how they function. You got law enforcement. I don't know. I couldn't tell from our report how many police officers there were, but I'm sure the ratio was pretty high. You need probation, and then you need ancillary institutions like the DMV and others all to participate. Now, I guess there's an interesting question about whether you institutionalize it or do these kinds of events. But in the long term, as you suggest, it's potentially cost saving, both in dollars and in lives. But it's not easily done if there isn't a push. And as Sandy says, if it's a win-win, and if it looks like in the long run it saves costs and lives, where's the impetus in the legislature, in law enforcement, in the governor's office, in the public defender's office, in the AG's office? Where is the push to find that answer and to really devote some resources in the short term to saving money? Is there such a push, or is this something where those of you who are sort of engaged as guerrillas, G-U-E-I, who are picking what resources you can and pulling people together, trying to get it done piece by piece?
Well, I could take a part of that and say that one of the value-added portions of Fugitive Safe Surrender is that it is a one-stop shop. You heard Dr. Howard mention the individual who had issues in 21 of all of the counties in the state. When you come to Fugitive Safe Surrender, those judges are granted the authority to have statewide jurisdiction. So you don't have to run around to all those other counties.
And you would have to hire a lawyer. If you had to do it on your own, it would be an expensive proposition. You have to hire a lawyer, you'd have to be in touch with the prosecutors in every county, you have to get an agreement that's really unusual.
And it might not be fair to ask Wanda and Lori this question, but I think going back to Raymond's question, is there a will that you see in the state, in the legislature, in the State House? Is there a will to make this a regular, every so often, every several months, you could go and get this taken care of? If you've got almost 5,000 people who show up in Jersey City, goodness knows how many more folks there are out there. We know that there are tens of thousands of warrants that, are just out there endlessly growing, right? Where's the will? Does it exist?
I think there's a will to figure out what's the best way to do it.
What about to pay for it?
Well, I think part of it is that we pay for it throughout our system. So whether or not the open warrant is being addressed to someone who's being arrested and then lodged at the county jail and then brought back and forth to court, so we end up paying for it. So how do we then take the resources that we're already using, reallocate them in such a way so that we're smarter about how we get people through the system? And so there definitely is conversations about how to do that. So there is a will. You see us participating in these programs. We had our most successful event. Obviously, we're interested in figuring that out, and there's been ongoing conversation about how just to do that.
Excuse me, let me go back to the example that Bill gave us of the young man who had warrants in 21 counties. There are people who would sit here with us and say, well, why are we giving special consideration to somebody who has absolutely no respect for the law? The rest of us follow the rules. This person isn't following the rules. God knows how many of those thousands, have done the same thing. They're not deserving of this. Why are we doing it?
I've had tickets in 3 or 4 counties, but
don't name the counties.
But I paid the tickets.
But how would
Why?
you? How would you
Because
answer
I had
that
the resources.
critic?
It's not to say that young person, that young man in this case, would not have settled if he had had financial resources. So what I'm saying is, fugitive, I don't know, maybe.
But he got the tickets in the first place. Again, I think that.
Oh boy!
I think
now that's almost a requirement of citizenship.
No, but
tell
Bill,
me who hasn't gotten a ticket.
I think that there is part of the society that would say you are coddling people who have no respect for the law.
But it's not true.
We follow it, and they don't.
And we have to find a way to talk back to those folk if they'll let us know their opinion about these things. I have, a great deal of respect for the law, but I might change lanes improperly. I'm rather famous for drifting through the red light, and the cameras take a picture. I don't mean to disregard traffic laws, but occasion I do, and when I receive the ticket, I pay it. So if I didn't have the wherewithal to pay it, I might be lined up for Fugitive Safe Surrender. Very often we are catering to people who are victims of poverty. This is really invariably the clientele.
20 seconds left, Bill. We're going to let you have the last word.
Oh my. I think we should find an answer to your question. How can we keep this going? How can We rely on what these people know because of their experience to move this thing forward, because in Union and Essex, when we hosted Safe Surrender, less than half the people who had warrants appeared.
Got to stop you there. With our thanks to Bill Howard, Wanda Moore, and Lori Scott-Pickens, we do have to stop, but visit us on Facebook at facebook.com/DueProcessTV and let us know how Fugitive Safe Surrender strikes you.
And come back and join us next week and every week for more on law and justice. Till then, for Sandy, Tanya Ivanova, and all of us here at Due Process, I'm Raymond Brown. Thanks for watching.
No, we never expected the thousands of people to surrender. Or in other parts of the country, there was, in Boston, only 250 people surrendered. In Baltimore, only 500. So we were pleasantly surprised to have thousands. And even here today, we're really shocked at the number already today. It is a public safety issue, and it gives these people an opportunity to get a second chance and be productive citizens and taxpayers. And if you talk to people in line, they want to work, and this will give them the ability to be able to work. We have all the court systems here, so we can resolve all your matters in one place. We have statewide jurisdiction for the courts. Literally we're saving millions of dollars for the state of New Jersey by not having these people incarcerated even for 2 or 3 days in the county jail.
Want even more insight on law and justice? Become a fan of Due Process on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter and watch us on demand on YouTube.